Welcome back to this web-based CEDS training, a new approach to developing your comprehensive economic development strategy. I'm Josh Beck and have Steve Etcher with me from Marks Nelson LLC. And we spoke last time under Module 1 about purpose, talking about the CEDS background and planning essential. During this module, we're going to talk about the process of developing a CEDS. And like most things, that begins with preparation.
So how do you prepare a CEDS? The preparation of a CEDS will depend on local circumstances, the organization's staff capacity, and the level of resources within the region. The time it takes to develop an effective process will vary depending on the area's experience with economic development, the complexity of its problems, and the degree of coordination and cooperation among the participant stakeholders. As a reminder from Module 1, a key element in the process is the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Committee, also known as the Strategy Committee. This is a requirement for those funded districts that are receiving financial assistance from EDA. Established by the planning organization, the Strategy Committee is the principal facilitator of the CEDS process and is responsible for developing and updating the CEDS. Remember, the Strategy Committee should broadly represent the main economic interest of the region.
That's right, and it brings us to our next step, which is really all about engagement. So as Steve had said, and we talked about in the previous module, a CEDS emerges from a continuing planning process developed with a broad-based and diverse stakeholder participation that addresses the economic problems and the potential of a region. The CEDS should include information about how and to what extent stakeholder input and support was solicited. Information on how the planning organization collaborated with its diverse set of stakeholders, including public sector, private interest, nonprofits, educational institutions, and community organizations, in the development of the CEDS and the formation of the Strategy Committee should all be documented in the CEDS. For updated CEDS, information on how these critical stakeholder groups contributed to the plan's implementation should also be noted. Documented evidence of these strategic partnerships strengthens a CEDS by demonstrating the commitment of local partners to coordinate work and investment across the region. It helps effectively target local funds and private sector resources, and it legitimizes the CEDS as a product representing the region as a whole. Information should also be included that describes the planning organization's efforts to regularly engage partners and stakeholders on monitoring progress on the CEDS and to keep the plan both current and relevant.
Planners should take care to build stakeholder participation and buy-in for long-term planning initiatives. Stakeholders need to understand how they fit into the picture of regional economic competitiveness, and more important, how engagement in a CEDS process will benefit their communities and organizations. Consider using the CEDS as an opportunity to illustrate how the region's stakeholders are linked together. Illustrate the business-to-business linkages, such as clusters, supply networks, and value chains, and the social connections between the social networks and investor relationships. In addition, consider identifying opportunities for short-term, medium-term, and long-term activities in the CEDS. Stakeholder engagement can be maintained effectively and expanded to new stakeholders through short-term wins. Economic development organizations are encouraged to work with and make use of other EDA programs such as university centers, local technical assistance, trade adjustment assistance, and economic adjustment assistance. EDA regional office staff can provide current information on accessing these valuable programs, as well as other non-EDA programs that may be useful in development and implementation of your CEDS.
That's right, Steve, and such an important point worth reinforcing here. So CEDS, again, are designed to bring together the public and private sectors in the creation of an economic roadmap to diversify and strengthen regional economies. The CEDS should analyze the regional economy and serve as a guide for establishing regional goals and objectives, developing and implementing a regional plan of action, and identifying investment priorities and funding sources. Public and private sector partnerships are critical to the implementation and integral elements of a CEDS. As a performance-based plan, the CEDS will serve as a critical role in the region's efforts to defend against economic dislocations due to global trade, competition, and other events resulting in the loss of jobs and private investment in a region.
Thanks, Josh. And to reinforce what has been said in Module 1 at the beginning of this module, the CEDS must be the result of a continuing economic development planning process that is developed with broad-based and diverse public and private sector participation. That participation should be consistent with Section 302 of the Public Works and Economic Development Act. And each CED must promote regional resiliency, and it must be unique and responsive to the region it represents. To reiterate again the summary points of the new CEDS, each CEDS must include a summary of the economic development conditions of the region, an in-depth analysis of economic and community development strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, commonly known as a SWOT analysis. It should also incorporate strategies and an implementation plan to build upon the region's strengths and opportunities and resolve the weaknesses and threats facing the region. These should be consistent with applicable state and local economic development or workforce development strategies. And also remember to include performance measures that can be used to evaluate the planning organization's successful development and implementation of the CEDS. Now remember, EDA will publish and periodically update these guidelines to provide further guidance to practitioners.
So let's talk about the content in the CEDS and some of the various components. But before we do, I think it's important to note that for a CEDS to be impactful and really effective, we need to make sure that we're linking all of these sections together. Elements of the CEDS content should build upon and shape each other to result in a coherent, targeted document. And that begins with the SWOT. The SWOT section, or Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats, for those who are not familiar, it recommends assessing a wide variety of regional attributes. And those attributes can include everything from the state of the regional economy, clusters, partners, and resources for economic development. It can include global competitiveness, FDI exports, workforce job-driven training, spatial efficiency and sustainability, broadband, energy, natural hazards, equitable development. All these things can be included in a SWOT analysis. We're going to dive deeper into a SWOT analysis in a future section.
Once you understand and have completed your SWOT analysis, under identifying those opportunities, threats, and weaknesses and strengths within your region, it's time to develop a strategic action plan to address those concerns. The strategic action direction and associated action plan should logically flow from the internal and external factors that speak to the region's assets and limitations, and its role in capacity building within the region. The strategic direction and action plan are the heart and soul of the CEDS document. As such, the CEDS must contain a section setting forth goals and objectives necessary to solve the economic problems or to capitalize on the resources of the region. As a reminder, goals are broad, primary regional expectations. The objectives are more specific than goals, and they are clearly measurable and stated in realistic terms, considering what can be accomplished over the 5-year time frame of the CEDS. The CEDS must contain a section which identifies programs and activities designed to implement the goals and objectives outlined in the CEDS. The plan of action should implement the goals and objectives in a manner that promotes economic development and opportunity, fosters effective transportation access, enhances and protects the environment, maximizes effective development and the use of workforce consistent with any applicable state or local workforce investment strategy, that promotes the use of technology and economic development, including access to high-speed telecommunications, that balances resource through sound management of physical development, and obtains and utilizes adequate funds and other resources. The strategic direction should evolve from a clearly defined vision with prioritized goals and measurable objectives. A successful action plan should then focus on those regionally driven strategic priorities that will result in a prioritized, measurable collection of capacity building activity areas. The action plan, however, should not simply be a list of projects, nor should the action plan reflect only those activities for which EDA alone could potentially support.
So once we have the strategic action plan in place, of course, it's important to move on to developing performance measures, the evaluation framework, which is associated measures and timelines that should cascade from the strategic direction and action plan, which in turn flow from the initial SWOT analysis, bringing all three of those components together as we talked about. We need to make sure that we emphasize measurable goals and strategies rather than just a standalone list of projects. The CEDS must contain a section that lists the performance measures used to evaluate the planning organization's successful development and implementation of the CEDS. And these things can include, but of course not be limited to, 1, the number of jobs created after implementation of the CEDS, 2, the number and types of investments undertaken in a region, 3, the number of jobs retained in a region, 4, the amount of public sector investment in a region after the implementation of the CEDS, and 5, changes in the economic environment of a region. But of course, that's not a comprehensive list necessarily.
In addition to the background information, the SWOT analysis, the strategic action plan, and the performance measure, EDA also recommends that you integrate and leverage your CEDS planning activities with other efforts and resources currently within your region. You need to discuss within your CEDS the methodology that you use for cooperating and integrating with other statewide economic development priorities. You need to look for opportunities to cross-plan with other organizations and entities that have shared missions. And the CEDS should integrate other regional planning efforts, such as your transportation planning, housing development, environmental planning, and hazard mitigation planning, just to name a few. The CEDS should identify opportunities for the integrated use of these local, state, private, and federal funds towards those outcomes.
It's also important to infuse economic resilience into the CEDS. And in fact, each CEDS must promote regional resiliency and be unique and responsive to the relevant region. And economic resiliency, of course, is an area's ability to withstand, prevent, or quickly recover from major disruptions, i.e. shocks, to its underlying economic base as a result of natural disaster or economic downturn. The CEDS serves as a critical mechanism to help regions identify vulnerabilities and withstand or recover from disruptions. Integrating resiliency into the CEDS can take multiple forms. Steady state initiatives include longer-term efforts that seek to bolster a community's ability to withstand or prevent a shock. And then, of course, we think about responsive initiatives, which include establishing capabilities that allow organizations or regions to be responsive to a region's recovery needs following an incident.
The inclusion of resiliency into the CEDS document should not be glossed over. As a baseline, EDA suggests the regions undertake a two-pronged approach to incorporating resiliency into the planning process and into the CEDS planning document. You need to make sure you implement goals or actions that will bolster the long-term economic durability of the region, and you should also establish information networks among the various stakeholders in the region to facilitate active and regular communication between the public, private, education, and nonprofit sectors to collaborate on existing and potential future challenges.
So that concludes Module 2, focused on the process of developing a CEDS. Once again, if you have any questions about the webinar, you'd like to submit some questions that you think we should be addressing during the live training, feel free to contact Steve or I at training@marksnelsonCPA.com, 816-743-7700, or check us out online at marksnelsonCPA.com. On behalf of both Steve and myself, thank you for joining us again, and we look forward to seeing you in Module 3, focused on product, the EDA CEDS guidelines.